I'm working on restoring this 1942 Delta drill press that I found by the side of the road. Last time I got it to this point. Now all that's left to do is everything else. In order to get the bearings out of the quill, I need to turn this retaining ring out. It looks like somebody's been in there previously and kind of beat it up with a screwdriver. So I think I'm going to make a proper tool to do that. Hopefully I can get that out. It looks to me like there's a very slight angle in these slots, so I'm going to put a little bit of a chamfer on the end of this. I put some wrench flats on this thing. It's pretty ugly. Let's see if it will work. It's also pretty soft. There it goes. Well, this one came out. Bearing came out easily. This one, not so much. Not only is this one stripped out, rounded out the tool, so I think it's time to go surgical on this. I've got this highly specialized and very carefully ground tool. That went exactly how I hoped it would, which is much better than how I thought it would go. And I got to polish the quill up at the same time. This is one of those ones that I kind of immediately regret doing, because when this bearing came out, all of this shim stock came out with it. If you look in this end, we'll call this the good end. It's a normal 35 millimeter, yeah, come on, there we go, 35 millimeter bearing surface. On this end, though, where the bearing sits is actually relieved a little bit. It works out that this inner surface is the same diameter as the major diameter of the thread of the retaining ring. I can't really see why anybody would intentionally go in and bore that out oversized. All I can think of here is that Bozo visited the Delta factory back during the war, and somebody screwed up this surface. And because they were pressed to get these out and not waste materials, this was the fix. And to be honest, I can't really come up with a less wrong way to fix this. I'm not sure there's enough material here to go to a bigger bearing, and these are a special bearing that has this notch in the inner race. I picked up some new bearings for the spindle from a company called Hammer Scale. It's just a 6003 bearing with a sleeve pushed into it. It's probably not the quality of bearing I would have liked, and looking at it now, I probably should have just made a piece to press into a bearing myself, but they'll work. This end drops in just like it should. This retaining ring is still just about good enough to use. It's such a fine thread, and the threads on the inner side of the bore are so shallow that it just wants to cross thread immediately, but I think I got it. For this end that was misbored, I think the first thing I'm going to try is what was done before and just try to shim it out. So I got an assortment of shim stock. So I did that a bunch of times. I'm coming up with a 18 thousandths difference. Divide by 2. Need about a 9 thousandths shim. So it turns out I don't actually have 9 thousandths shim stock, so I'm going with a piece of 7 and a piece of 1.5. That should give me a little bit of clearance to slide this down in there. But I really don't see this going well. It's also too tall. Well, I managed to get the shim in. Let's see about the bearing. It's kind of coming away from the edge on the ends. So what I did was I took some 1/1000th shim stock and put it just over the ends of the other pieces. Now it's a really tight fit. Looking down in there, it doesn't look like the other one is mashing out. So I think that's going to be good to go. I'll be honest, I didn't really think that was going to work all that well. It's supposed to be a slip fit. It's press fit now. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. It might even make it a little more rigid. But there is a little flap shim stock sticking out here that I'd like to get out. That was one of the pieces that I put down to kind of guide it into place. Don't really want that, baseball card and the bicycle spoke thing going on here when the spindle hits it. I managed to just take this pick and kind of go around the inside and break it off. I did also feel around the outside of this with the pick, and it feels like it's down against that register pretty well. I guess there's a little gap. Call me crazy, but I don't really like the idea of touching off a moving cutter on those threads. So I've got some of the leftover shim stock from before, and I'll use that. Really awkward angle. The taper on the spindle is chewed up pretty badly on the end here. I don't know that I can clean that up without taking a lot off of this, but it seemed like the chuck was on there pretty well anyway. I'll just do a little light stoning on that. And there are a couple little burrs on this collar. I'll just turn those off. I changed my mind. I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit. So, swept the little bit that is still good on this taper. Got my compound set at the right angle. I swapped over to the 4-jaw chuck. The cullet chuck was within about 1/1000th, but I knew I could do better with this. And I clocked it off of the bearing surface rather than the taper, so I know that this will be concentric. That'll still seat on there and still have room to get it off. There are a couple burrs from taking the chuck off in the past. Clean those up. The jaws on the chuck don't close very evenly. Let's see what we can do about that. I gave these jaws a quick stoning, a little cleanup. They're really not in bad shape. There's not a lot of wear on them. It's definitely not the worst drill chuck I own. I am feeling some sharp edges and maybe some burrs kind of around the opening on this. How about a round oilstone file? I'm going to give these a little spit shine as well. So there are little tabs inside this collar that engage the little slots on the bearing. So I have to try to get that lined up right. But of course the bearing just wants to spin. There we go. The feed handle on the parts diagram shows a little groove near the end. This one doesn't have it. We'll embellish a little bit. I spent some time deburring both the spindle and the drive inside the pulley. Still not sure what's binding up on it, but I've got it good enough that it will move. It does make it hard to set the quill return spring though. I think that'll loosen up in time, and I'll just have to readjust when it does. This gets a 3/8 fine thread on it, and I thought I had a die for that, but turns out I don't. So now I'm going to try to single point it with a lot of stick out and no tailstock support. This is actually supposed to be one of those little spade type thumb screws, but I think that's better. Let's see about brazing this thing back together. I'm going to try to do this in 2 stages, so I ground most of this down to nice clean metal, left the original piece there for alignment, and I turned a little spacer that these fit on. And so this is intentionally not clean, so that hopefully the braze doesn't stick to it. I just gave it a good coating of soot from the torch. I've got a clamp set up, and that should be pretty good to hold it in place. I'm going to preheat this in the oven and then try to stick it together. Good news is it came off of this pretty easily. And it looks like I've got a pretty good joint on the outside here, but not as much on the inside. I'm going to grind this side out and braze from this side now. I tried to basically cut all of the crack out, get down into the braze. Same routine again, preheat this, braze it. Might have to do another round to clean up the inside of it. Went back to the 3rd round, filled this in. Pretty happy with that now. So, time to just file it to shape. Not really surprised this thing's no longer really round. Put the bolt in here to kind of try to squish it back into shape as much as I can. Really only concerned about this part of it where it's brazed. I'm just going to come in with the boring head and try to clean that up and adjust as necessary if it starts hitting somewhere else. So of course, after all that, I did a test fit on this, and it cracked. So I threw it back on, did a real quick, ugly job, and now it seems pretty solid. I'm going to clean this up a little bit more, throw some paint on it, and then I'm going to try to make this nut look like it's supposed to. I don't know that these little thumb wheels for the quill adjuster were originally knurled. It seems like they should be. It's an odd thread on here, it's like a 1/2-16. So I'm just using this piece instead of turning up another mandrel. I ended up doing the other side of this with the carbide face mill because hand feeding a fly cutter gets really tedious. And just drilled and tapped some holes in these. I had to drop the head down a little bit. Now it seems like a pretty comfortable height for drilling holes. Most of the time if I'm just drilling a quick hole, I'm going to have a sacrificial piece of wood on there anyway. I think that'll be pretty good. I need to make some T-nuts for this, figure out a vise. And because I know this is going to come up, this is only going to be for drilling holes, not for milling. We saw the spindle and the bearings earlier. They're not suitable for milling. And it just has a drill chuck, also not suitable for holding an end mill. Only for drilling holes. You gotta be kidding me. Motor's running backwards. So it looks like the start windings come off the back here. One goes through the starter switch. And then the two that are on this side, I think are the main windings. Okay, so there's continuity between those. So I should just swap these. That will reverse the orientation of the main windings with respect to the starter windings. And we should be able to drill a hole. Of course, there's one more thing I need to do before I can call this thing done. Out of this whole project, this is the one part that's getting me the farthest out of my comfort zone. The technique I've settled on this is to mask off as much as I can. A lot of the letters are too small to really mask off well. Then I just use the X-Acto knife to come in and remove the paint on the other parts. It is slightly etched down in the colored parts, so this seems to be working all right. I'm ending up with, little scratch marks on here, but this isn't going to be a museum piece. This is for me, for my shop. I know you can get little vinyl stickers for these things. I don't think that would feel right on here. What's the saying? Far from perfect, but perfect from far. It's good enough for what I need. Or, I can just kind of... That looks pretty good, doesn't it? Well, I'm pretty happy with that setup, and I hope you enjoyed seeing what went into bringing this thing back to life.